Yeah. I know. Nobody ever wants to trade down in the NFL draft, but it could be an option for the Jets this year with the seventh overall pick. And a trade down could be much more valuable than you think. I'll explain why today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, April 16th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we have our weekly mailbag show. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. The NFL draft is approaching, and I turn it over to you to ask your questions. Our first question, John, every year I want the Jets to trade back and accumulate draft capital. Is there a spot in the draft you think is too low to drop in the first round? That's a great question. And I think that you're in the minority if you want the Jets to trade down every year. I'm with you. I think trading down is a really solid strategy. And I'm going to get into that in a bit. But to answer the question, in theory, no, there's not a spot that's too far to trade down to. It's just a question of how much do I get in return? Because if I'm trading down from 7 to 10, I'm not going to need as much as I need to trade down from 7 to 20. The further you fall back, the more you got to get in return. So it really depends on, how much you're getting back. If there was a team at 25 that was offering, 3 first-round picks and 3 second-round picks, those 25 too low to drop? Of course not. But I also think that there's a very imperfect understanding of how draft picks should be valued in the NFL. Most teams use it's called the Cowboys chart. It's called the Jimmy Johnson trade chart. It was kind of revolutionized by the Dallas Cowboys, late 80s, early 90s. The Cowboys essentially did research on how draft trades typically turn out, and they assigned a point value to each pick. So typically when you make a trade during the NFL draft, you say, okay, well, the first pick is worth this many points. If we're going to trade down from one, we got to get that many points in return. So it could be the 5th pick and this pick. And so essentially the idea behind the Cowboys chart is each pick is assigned a number of points. At the end of the day, the picks that you send out should equal or come close to equaling the number of points for the picks you receive back. But it's been proven through the years that these really inaccurately measure how much picks are really worth. So a while back, a couple of guys, Jason Fitzgerald, who runs the great salary cap website, overthecap.com, and a guy named Brad Spielberger actually examined how these picks actually turn out. How valuable should picks actually be? And they came up with a very different point chart from what the Cowboys had in the 90s. And what they found, generally speaking, is that teams underestimate the value in trading down and overestimate the value in trading up. And there have been other studies that have shown this, that teams overestimate their ability to hit on higher picks and underestimate their ability to hit on lower picks. So let's take this to the logical extreme. Let's say the Philadelphia Eagles called the Jets, and they said, Jets, we want to trade up from 32 to 7. So that's a pretty big jump. That's a 25 pick jump. If the Eagles offered the Jets, say, the first round pick, the second round pick, and the third round pick, so let's say 32, 64, 96 in exchange for 7. If the Jets took that trade, they would get annihilated by media reaction. People would say that's not nearly enough. That's crazy. You're not getting anywhere near the value you should be getting for that pick. However, if you actually look at the outcomes historically of the 7th pick, and then the picks that are 32, 64, 96, there's a case to be made that it actually would be a good deal for the Jets. The Fitzgerald Spielberger chart says it's actually a big win based on the points they assign to these picks. So the Fitzgerald Spielberger chart assigns 2,014 points to the 7th overall pick, and then 1,244 points for the 32nd pick, 892 for the 64th, 687 for the 96th. So you'd rather have, according to the Fitzgerald Spielberger chart, you'd rather have 32, 64, 96 than just 7. And I think there's a lot in the NFL that's really counterintuitive. The moves that are the flashy moves in the NFL frequently are not the moves that help you win. Frequently, the things that help you win in the NFL seem like bad moves at the time. It's different from any other sport. In the NBA, the moves that seem like the best moves are usually the best moves. You go out and sign the biggest free agents, they're going to help your team. The NBA, you can build through the draft, but there are other ways to build a good team. You can stockpile assets. You can work the trade market. You can sign big name free agents. In the NFL, you really can only build your team through the draft. And the teams that draft best, they're not the teams with the highest picks. They're the teams with the most picks, because the draft is a very inexact process. You're trying to project players for 10 years down the line, which is tough to do because there are things that are unforeseeable that will happen to some players. Some player will suffer a career-altering injury in their second season. It'll never be the same. Some guy may not be as motivated once he gets a big contract. And these are things that are very difficult to project out. So what you want to do, you want to build up a margin for error. You want to have extra picks. So that way, if I miss on a pick, I'm still in pretty good shape. I can still hit on a guy. And, let's go back to my example. Now, I think the perception would be that if you trade the 7th pick for 32, 64, 96, that you'd be really throwing away a chance at a premium player. Well, I actually looked back at the last 25 years worth of draft picks. The 7th overall pick has produced 13 Pro Bowl players, 13 players who have made at least one Pro Bowl in their career. If you add up 32 plus 64 plus 96, those picks have produced 12 players who have made the Pro Bowl. So just about your ability to find a Pro Bowl player is just about as good if you have all three of 32, 64, 96 as it would be to just have 7. And with 32, 64, 96, you have more opportunities to find, quality starters who maybe aren't stars, maybe guys who aren't going to be Pro Bowlers, but guys who can help your team out. Or role players, guys who are important, who play important roles, maybe your number 4 corner, maybe your swing tackle, somebody like that. And, going back to what I said a little bit earlier, why is team building so different in the NFL than it is in the NBA? Well, the NBA, you only have 5 guys on the court at one time. So one player makes a huge outsized impact. In the NFL, you only have 11 guys on the field at one time, and they only play half the game. On the NBA, when you're on the court, you play offense and defense. In the NFL, you only play one of the two, unless maybe Travis Hunter will change the dynamics on that. But one player means less in the NFL than it does in any other league. And that's why this big splashy moves in the NFL don't have a big impact. It's really more about building a complete team. It's not about making the splashy move. So when a team trades up in the first round, they get a lot of praise. You always hear the expression, "Oh, they went and got their guy." When you go get your guy's out there, you got to go get him. And that's great, but you also got to hit on the less splashy moves. And when you trade picks away to move up, those are opportunities you're giving away to land the important role players who are critical in building a winning NFL team. So I am with the questioner on this. I am always in favor of a trade down. That doesn't mean trading down is always the right move. Back in 2019, I was kind of in favor of a trade down when the Jets were picking 3 and lacked a second-round pick. Well, they traded down, they wouldn't have gotten Quinn and Williams. So, Jets were obviously better staying put in 2019. But generally speaking, if over the long run, the team that trades down consistently is going to do a lot better than the team that trades up consistently or the team that stays put consistently, because the lifeblood of winning in the NFL is building through the draft. It's unlike any other sport. There's really no other professional sports league where you have to build through the draft. In all the other sports leagues, you can build through the draft, but there are other mechanisms to win. The NFL, you can't, because the premium players don't hit free agency in the NFL because you got the franchise tag. And you have career-altering injuries always around the corner. So when your team offers you an extension, you'll take it, even if you're leaving a little money on the table. This means that you have to find your impact players through the draft. And it's been shown over and over again. The teams that find those impact players in the draft have the most picks. How do you get the most picks? You trade down. See how it works. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we will turn our attention to the NFL draft, but we'll move past the first round. We've been talking a lot about round 1. There, of course, are 6 rounds after that. And the Jets have 2 premium needs. They can only address one in round 1. So what happens to the one they can't address in round 1? I'll give you some ideas continuing here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work does not end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Of course, the Jets, they're looking to draft prospects. They're scouting them out. You can think of LinkedIn as your small business's scouting department. They can give you access to the best candidates. Post Your Job, LinkedIn's new feature, can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch on YouTube every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question comes from Drew. Hi, John. I think our two biggest needs are right tackle and wide receiver. Barring trades, we can only address one of these positions in the first round. Are there any players you like on day two that can fill the other position? What limitations do these players have that concern you? A good question there by Drew. As you mentioned, you can only fill one of the two on day one, and they may not fill either on day one. I think if like Abdul Carter somehow fell to 7, you'd run to the podium with the card saying Abdul Carter's name on it. If Mason Graham was available at 7, I think you'd run to the podium with his name on, with the card with his name on it. If Travis Hunter fell to 7, you'd sprint to the podium with the card with his name on it. And that's the thing about the NFL draft. You don't want to go in with tunnel vision. You don't want to go in thinking we have to draft a player at a certain position, because that's where you make mistakes. I could go back to 2007 when the Arizona Cardinals thought that they desperately needed a tackle and they drafted Levi Brown. They did not think they needed a running back because they had Edgerrin James, and they passed on Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson was obviously a much better player than Levi Brown. So it's tricky because I think the later you get into the draft, I think when you're in round 1, to an extent, needs come into play, because typically there's going to be where you pick, especially in the top half of round 1, there's going to be a great prospect at practically every position. So you can like focus on needs a little bit more to a degree. I mean, look, I'm not going to draft a tackle over Abdul Carter if he's available. I'm not going to draft a tackle over Mason Graham or Travis Hunter if they're available. I guess Hunter might fill the wide receiver role, but so we can stick with Graham and Carter, but I think that once you get to day 2, you can't count on a guy to be a starter. I think you have a decent shot at getting a guy who's a starter, but I don't think you can ever count on somebody to be a day 1 starter. What do you mean by that? Well, let's say I gave you 25% odds for a guy to be a starter you draft on day 2. 25% is like decent. I mean, if you give me 25% of odds of anything, like that's not like 1%. 25% happens a decent amount. But obviously, like it's still like less likely to happen than it is to happen. That said, there are a couple of guys. I'll give you one for each position. So at the wide receiver position, there's a prospect out of Stanford, Alijah Iomenor. Alijah Iomenor. I think he's going to go day 2. Here's the reason I like him. I think sometimes we overthink what matters in a prospect. I mean, at the wide receiver position, what do we always talk about? We talk about their 40-yard dash time, which is really kind of code for how fast are they. We talk about how big they are. And these things do matter to an extent. I mean, obviously, speed and size are things that help you as a wide receiver. But what's the biggest part of being a wide receiver? It's running routes effectively. I feel like you ever see the movie Moneyball where Billy Beane, the Oakland A's GM, is in the room with all the scouts, and he keeps saying, like, what are we looking for? We're looking for guys who get on base. The scouts are focused on all these other things, and Billy Beane's like focused on the thing that matters, getting on base. I feel like, sometimes I could be Billy Beane sitting in that room. We're focused on size. We're focused on speed. What matters? Running routes effectively. And in Alijah Iomenor, you have a guy who is very effective at running routes. He has a kind of a diverse set of releases off the line of scrimmage. So he's a difficult guy to jam in press coverage. He just does a lot of little subtle, nuanced things as a route runner. You can find the hole in zone. You can kind of run under a guy underneath who's trying to hit him inside the first 5 yards. He's just kind of a crafty receiver. He may not be the most physically overwhelming prospect. He may not be like a speed demon, but he's a guy who understands how to get open. So, I want to use the term ceiling and floor carefully, because in theory, like any receiver could be an elite receiver, and in theory, any receiver could be a bust. It doesn't matter. Like you always hear about the guy who's a can't miss prospect and a lot of them end up missing. So there's really no such thing as a can't miss prospect. And lots of guys who are dismissed because although his ceiling's not high end up being really good receivers. But what I'd say is that I think that the odds of Alec Iomanor being like an elite receiver are probably not that great. The odds of him being a solid receiver are pretty good because he like understands the fundamentals. And I could see him being like a number 2, number 3 receiver. And just significantly, I could see him being a day 2 pick who contributes. Now, on the offensive line, I'd go with a guy out of BC, a tackle, Ozzy Trapolo. And I think that like he would be a higher, this is my read on him. I think he'd be a higher pick if he did not have an unusual frame. He's about 6'8", 6'9", and comes in like around 310 pounds, which is kind of lean and also very tall for a tackle. You know, one of the things we always talk about when we're evaluating tackle prospects is you want someone to have a good center of balance, because if you start leaning, that's you get off your center of gravity. It's really easy for NFL edge rushers to kind of throw you off balance and throw you out of the way. Well, when you're 6'8", it's kind of tough to not lean. But I still think that like Ozzy Trapolo has like good technique. I think that he uses his hands effectively. And he looks, he's kind of lean. With his frame, he can add some muscle and not really lose a lot of athleticism. So I don't have a ton of conviction. Like I'm not going to say like he's definitely going to be a starter day one, but he's like the type of guy where like I could see him stepping in and being a player immediately. That's one of the things you're trying to figure out. Like day 2, day 3, the odds are against everybody being a day 1 starter. But this is a guy I think, if he's a little shorter or maybe a little bigger, he probably would go higher. And I do think he's going to be available on day 2. I think he's a conceivable option for the Jets. So I think that's probably where those are the 2 guys. You suggest for one at each position. I gave you one at each position. Next question from Jimmy. John, which existing impact players on the roster that Muji and Glenn owe no loyalty to have enough trade value that they could realistically be moved on draft day? In what scenario would you be okay with making this kind of move? Well, Jimmy, there aren't a lot of them from the standpoint that like a lot of key players left in free agency. The Jets lined this thing up so that they had a lot of major contract expirations at the end of the 2024 season. So, I mean, who has value? I mean, Garrett Wilson does. I wouldn't trade. Unless Garrett like told you there's no way I'm re-signing with you, I would not even consider trading Garrett Wilson. Ditto Sauce Gardner. Jermaine Johnson is coming off a serious injury. You're not going to get a lot of value for him, or you're not going to get as much value as you should. I would not trade Will McDonald. I mean, like if we're going through like the guys who would have value, it's like these are the guys I want on the team. These are guys I don't want to get rid of. So. I mean, if you're talking about like who could be traded, I might look at like somebody who was a Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh project, who maybe the new coaching staff comes in and has like no loyalty to. So like, and I'm just throwing a name out there. I'm not saying the Jets are going to be interested in him, but like hypothetically, if Glenn and Muji did not like Malachi Corley, and this was very much like a Joe Douglas project player, maybe, but like I've got no indication that the Jets are interested in trading Malachi Corley. The one thing I would say is I'm not sure Corley's spot's guaranteed on the roster with all the wide receivers they brought in. So I don't know. That would be my wild guess, but it's just a wild guess. Please don't like go around on the internet saying John B said this. John B starting a rumor. I'm just throwing out that might be the logical name, but I would say it's very unlikely we're going to see a trade of like a player for a pick. Anything could happen, but my guess is that it will not happen. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the guard position, which actually is pretty solid for the Jets. So can it remain solid? Can the Jets afford to keep both of their quality starting guards who are just 1 year away from free agency? The answer is yes. But there is one who should be a bigger priority. I'll tell you who that is as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. You got to love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals and assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same game parlay for a chance to win big. NBA playoffs are exciting. I'm not sure who's going to win the championship. And I know we're like an East Coast show. I know we focus on New York, but man, that NBA West Coast playoff, that's going to be crazy. That's going to be really good. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today at FanDuel.com. Again, FanDuel.com for your $250 in bonus bets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question, John, while I really like having AVT and John Simpson, both are going to be free agents at the end of the season. Is it possible or even good roster building strategy to pay two guards good money? Assuming you can only keep one, who do you prefer? Also, Darren Muji said they are keeping AVT at guard and Tippmann at center. So was the Josh Myers signing just to make Justin Fields more comfortable? Otherwise, I don't really get it. So a couple questions there. First, can the Jets pay both Alijah Vera-Tucker and John Simpson money? Is it good team building? And to me, the answer is yes. I understand the concern, but I feel like maybe we get a little too worried about dedicating a lot of resources to one position. I mean, yeah, the Jets can pay both guards. It just means that they'll have to be a little bit cheaper at some of the other positions. I mean, so let's think about this on the offensive line. Let's say hypothetically the Jets draft another tackle this year. Well, then I don't see why you couldn't pay AVT and Simpson, because for the next 3 years, you'll have two tackles on rookie contracts. So your tackles are going to be making nothing, which means you can throw extra money into keeping guards. But I think generally speaking that you're always better off keeping your own guys than you are looking at the open market, because we've seen over and over, and we've seen this from a Jets fan perspective, but we've seen it across the league. Importing free agents from other teams is a really, really risky move. It frequently fails. It's a very inefficient process because you're bidding against all these other teams. You're bidding against teams that have desperate GMs who are willing to overpay to try and save their jobs. It's one of those things where I feel like letting a good player walk is frequently penny wise and pound foolish, because you could say, well, we would have had to pay him. We would have had to make him the ninth highest paid player at his position. And he's not the ninth best guy. Yeah, that's great, but it's not like you're going to be able to find a replacement at a reasonable price. In free agency, there are lots of bidders. The supply is high, and the demand is high and the supply is low. So that drives prices up. And frequently what happens is you let a good player leave over money, and then you create a weakness, and then later on you have to spend even more money to fill the hole. I mean, that happened with the Jets back in 2006. They had guard Pete Kendall, who asked for a $1 million raise, and the Jets wouldn't give it to him. The Jets traded him to Washington. So they replaced him with this guy, Adrian Clark, who to this day, and look, now think about what I'm about to say here, because I want you to really appreciate the statement I'm about to make. Think about I've been watching the Jets for over 3 decades. So I've watched a lot of football, but more importantly, I've watched a lot of bad football. The Jets replaced Adrian Clark with Pete Kendall. The Jets replaced Pete Kendall with Adrian Clark. Adrian Clark is the worst offensive lineman I've ever seen on an NFL field. And think about some of the offensive lines I've seen with the Jets. Think about some of the players I've seen with the Jets on the offensive line. None were worse than Adrian Clark. In fact, I think it's fair to say that Adrian Clark, I don't think I would ever say in any other situation where a guard destroyed a season, but Adrian Clark just was so bad at left guard that he destroyed the season after the Jets traded Pete Kendall. So what did the Jets end up doing? They ended up having to go out and pay Alan Faneca a truckload of money in free agency. So this shows you, like, if the Jets had just paid Pete Kendall $1 million, they wouldn't have had to throw a ton of money at Alan Faneca. There's an old saying, the cheapest man pays the most in the end. So I think it's perfectly fine to pay both these guys. Now, if I had to choose one, it's AVT for two simple reasons. First of all, he's younger. Second of all, he's better. So, I mean, I'm always going to choose the guy who's both younger and better, because AVT's got more room to grow. He's just entering his prime. Simpson's, going to be 28 at the start of the season. So getting up there, I think 28, he still could have a couple of good years left as a guard. I think, especially for an interior lineman, if you're playing guard, you're not protecting the edge. So it's not as dire as playing tackle. I think generally speaking, guard is more of a strength position than it is an athleticism position, even though, of course, you need athleticism to some degree to play guard. But I think guards tend to age a little bit better than guys at other positions. That said, though, look, if I can only prioritize one, it's AVT, because I think AVT is really good. I think he's shown that maybe if he's either a star or he's slightly below level of a star, but he's a very consistent performer when he's on the field, does a really good job at the tackle position. And then the last question on that was on Josh Myers. And the question was, did they just do that to make Justin Fields comfortable? So if you're not familiar, Josh Myers was Justin Fields' center in college. I don't think they did it to make Justin Fields comfortable, though. I just think that, they thought he'd be good depth, because this is a guy with a couple of years of starting experience, and he's not great, but he wasn't a disaster when he played. And like, what am I looking for a backup offensive lineman? I'm looking for someone who's not a disaster. I'm looking for someone who can at least give you like some degree of functional play. Because like nobody really has good backups. Nobody has a backup who can anchor a line. You just don't want it to be a disaster. And one thing that is pretty clear in the NFL is there's a big difference between having an offensive line that's a disaster and an offensive line that's just kind of mediocre. You can function with an offensive line that's mediocre. You'd rather have an offensive line that's good, but if it comes down to it, like you can function as an offense with a mediocre offensive line. You can't function with a disaster offensive line. If you're just getting annihilated on every play in the trenches, your offense isn't going to go anywhere. If your offense can like at least like hold the other team to a stalemate at some point up front, then you have a shot if you have a good quarterback and good skill players. So I think it's just more a depth move. It gives the Jets a quality backup on the interior line. I mean, I'm a little relieved because my concern was when the Jets signed Josh Myers, oh God, are they going to move Tippmann to guard and AVT to tackle? And it's like, you just had two guys who've been bounced around position-wise through much of their careers, and they both finally found a home. Please don't move them off the home. And fortunately, it sounds like they're staying put. Tippmann will stay at center, AVT will stay at right guard, and Myers will be the primary backup at the center position, and it's a good thing. Look, he'll probably be one of the best backup centers in the league for whatever it's worth, which is I think makes it a really solid signing for the Jets. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast wars, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, please give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.